Chapter 3. Markets and Misunderstandings. Dawn broke over the sapphire oasis in a blaze of gold, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Thalia stood at the highest observation platform of Aquilon, watching as the mammoth beast that carried their city lowered its massive head to drink. The creature's movements were deliberate, almost reverent, as its wide mouth touched the glittering surface of the water. Around the oasis, 5 other colossal beasts performed the same ritual, each representing a different walking city. The beasts never fully entered the water, their enormous bodies remaining planted firmly in the surrounding sand, creating a living barrier that protected the precious resource from the encroaching desert. Thalia's gaze lingered on the beast that carried Pyrotus. Unlike Aquilon's turtle-like mount with its shell-encrusted back, the Pyrotus carrier resembled a massive armored lizard, its scales gleaming like burnished copper in the morning light. Steam rose from vents along its spine, evidence of the internal heat that powered the city it bore.
So different from our own,
she thought, observing how the Pyrotus beast took smaller, more frequent drinks, as though conserving the liquid it consumed. Yet we all depend on the same water, the same rare gift of the endless desert. The distant sound of hydraulics signaled Aquilon's water harvesting systems engaging, pipes extending from the city's underside to draw up precious liquid for storage in the massive crystal reservoirs. The gathered water would sustain them until the next oasis, perhaps months away.
Lady Thalia.
Her handmaiden's voice pulled her from her reverie.
Your father requests your presence in the council chamber. The meeting with Lord Aurelius will begin shortly.
Thalia turned, her face a careful mask of composed acceptance, though her stomach tightened at the news.
Thank you, Lissa. I'm ready.
Her formal attire had been selected with deliberate care. A high-necked gown of pale blue adorned with silver embroidery that depicted Aquilon's historical water treaties, its long sleeves and modest cut suggesting tradition and propriety. Her hair was styled in elaborate braids, interwoven with tiny water crystals that caught the light as she moved. The message was clear. She represented Aquilon first, herself second. The council chamber occupied the upper tier of Aquilon's governmental sector, its walls constructed of triple-layered crystal that provided both insulation and privacy. Water flowed between the crystal panels, its gentle movement creating shifting patterns of light across the floor. As Thalia entered, she noted the positioning of those already present. Her father sat at the head of the long table, flanked by his advisors. Across from him, Lord Cormac Aurelius occupied the guest position of honor, his own attendants arrayed behind him with military precision. Cormac rose as she entered, a smile curving his handsome features. In the bright morning light, his sovereign nature was more evident than it had been at the masquerade. Gold flecks swirled in his amber eyes, and his physical perfection seemed almost artificial in its flawlessness.
Lady Thalia,
he greeted, his voice carrying the subtle resonant undertone that marked sovereign speech.
Your beauty brightens an already brilliant morning.
She inclined her head in polite acknowledgement, carefully avoiding direct eye contact. She had been trained since childhood in the protocols for interacting with sovereigns. Their ability to compel through voice was weakened when eye contact was limited.
Lord Aurelius, I trust you found the Convergence Masquerade enjoyable.
Most illuminating,
he replied, those gold-flecked eyes studying her with unsettling intensity.
Though I confess to some disappointment that we were not granted the opportunity to dance.
Images from the previous night flashed through her mind. The masked stranger in borrowed Pyrotus finery, the inexplicable connection she'd felt during their dance, the revelation of his identity as her father's courier. Heat threatened to rise to her cheeks, but years of diplomatic training held it at bay.
Perhaps another time,
she replied non-committally, taking her seat at her father's right hand. The fathermark cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the business at hand.
Lord Aurelius, thank you for agreeing to this private council. As we discussed last night, your proposal of alliance through matrimony deserves our most serious consideration.
Cormac leaned forward, his posture relaxed, yet somehow predatory.
And have you reached a decision, Father Mark Maravan? Pyrotus values directness in negotiations.
Indeed.
The Fathermark's expression remained neutral, his deep blue eyes, so like Thalia's own, revealing nothing of his thoughts.
The proposed union has many merits. However, tradition demands certain protocols be observed.
Something flickered across Cormac's perfect features, a momentary frustration quickly masked.
Protocols?
According to the ancient laws of Aquilon, a daughter of the ruling house may not be formally betrothed without first completing the rite of clarity at the sacred wellspring.
Grand Hydrologist Nerin leaned forward, his perpetually damp sleeves leaving watermarks on the table.
The wellspring reveals truth through water dreaming, visions that guide the future union. It is non-negotiable.
Thalia kept her expression carefully neutral, though inwardly she was surprised. The rite of clarity was indeed traditional, but had not been performed in 3 generations. That her father would invoke it now suggested either genuine concern for tradition or a deliberate delay tactic. Cormac's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly.
I was not informed of this requirement. The wellspring is not on our agreed route. This creates complications.
Though his tone remained pleasant, the gold flecks in his eyes swirled more rapidly, betraying his irritation.
I understand your concern, Lord Aurelius. However, I have proposed several concessions to demonstrate our good faith while we attend to these traditions.
With a gesture, he signaled to Trade Minister Alara, who slid a document across the table. It bore the water seal of Aquilon, marking it as a formal agreement.
First, we offer an informal agreement of intent, acknowledging that both parties wish to pursue a formal betrothal pending completion of the sacred rites.
Second,
The Trade Minister continued.
Aquilon will immediately commence delivery of the promised water allocation. 50,000 crystal measures to be transferred to Pyrotus before our cities part ways.
And third, we propose joint patrols of the disputed Western territories, showing our united front to potential aggressors even before the formal alliance is sealed.
Cormac studied the document, his expression revealing nothing. After a calculated pause, he looked up.
Generous terms, Father Mark.
He tapped one finger against the document, the sound unnaturally crisp in the quiet chamber.
I accept these interim arrangements. When will the rite of clarity be performed?
The wellspring lies 3 days' journey northeast of our current position. Aquilon itself will not visit the location for many months, as it is not on our standard migration route.
He paused, his next words carefully measured.
My daughter will travel there with a small escort while our cities continue their respective journeys. Upon completion of the rite, she will rejoin Aquilon and we can proceed with formal negotiations.
Thalia fought to keep her surprise from showing. This was the first she had heard of such a plan, and the implications were significant. A journey separate from the safety of Aquilon, through the perilous desert, to a location her father had not mentioned to her before this moment. Cormac's gaze shifted to her, something calculating in his perfect features.
I would offer an escort from Pyrotus for Lady Thalia's protection. My elite Bellatori guards.
Most thoughtful,
Her father interrupted smoothly.
but unnecessary. Aquilon has already arranged appropriate protection. My daughter's safety is, of course, our paramount concern.
Of course.
Cormac echoed, though Thalia detected a note of displeasure beneath his perfect diplomacy.
When will this journey commence?
Tomorrow, at first light. The desert is more forgiving in the early hours.
So soon?
For the briefest moment, Cormac's composure slipped, revealing genuine surprise.
I had hoped for more time to become acquainted with Lady Thalia before any separation.
Water waits for no one, Lord Aurelius.
Thalia spoke for the first time since the negotiations began, keeping her tone respectful but firm.
The wellspring's power is strongest when the triple moons align, which occurs in 4 days' time. We must depart tomorrow to arrive in time for the proper astronomical conditions.
It was a fabrication, of course. The wellspring held no such astronomical requirements, but she had sensed her father's desire to expedite her departure and adapted accordingly. The slight nod of approval from the Fathermark confirmed her instinct had been correct.
I see.
Cormac's perfect smile returned, though it did not reach his eyes.
Then I shall look forward to our reunion all the more ardently.
The remainder of the meeting passed in discussion of logistical details, water transfers, patrol schedules, communication protocols. Throughout, Thalia maintained her diplomatic facade, though her mind raced with questions about this unexpected journey. Not until the Piratus delegation had departed did she turn to her father with unmasked concern.
Father, the rite of clarity hasn't been performed since grandmother's time, and the wellspring
Is very real, and you will indeed visit it.
He interrupted, his voice dropping to a near whisper despite the privacy of the chamber.
But we must speak further in absolute security. The courier awaits us.
Puzzled but obedient, Thalia followed her father through a series of progressively smaller corridors until they reached a hidden chamber accessible only through a water lock, a specialized door that required hydromantic manipulation to open. Once sealed inside, she found the council members already present, along with the courier from the previous night, Elian Norwood. He stood apart from the others, his tall frame rigid with alertness despite evident exhaustion. The silver streak in his dark hair caught the light from the water lamps, shimmering with an almost unnatural luminescence. He bowed formally as they entered, but Thalia noticed his gaze lingered on her a moment longer than protocol dictated.
Now we may speak freely.
Her father began, his voice grave.
The message Courier Norwood delivered last night confirms our worst fears. The dream plague is not a random illness, but a targeted weapon.
Nerin nodded, droplets of water falling from his mustache.
The Eastern Water Scouts discovered evidence that the plague victims are being collected, transported somewhere while still in their dream state.
And the pattern of outbreaks follows Pyrotus's movement too precisely to be coincidence,
Added Trade Minister Alara.
though we lack proof of Lord Aurelius's direct involvement.
Thalia's mind raced, connecting disparate pieces of information.
The wellspring journey is a ruse, then, to remove me from Pyrotus's influence?
Yes and no.
Her father replied.
You will indeed travel to the wellspring. It exists, though not for the purposes I claimed. It is an ancient site of power, one of the few places in the desert where the veil between dreams and reality thins.
Our scholars believe it may hold answers about the dream plague's resurgence.
Master Strategist Varen explained.
Perhaps even a defense against it.
More importantly, we fear you may be specifically targeted, Thalia.
Me? Why?
Her father exchanged glances with Nerin, who nodded reluctantly.
You suspect Lord Aurelius has ulterior motives beyond a simple alliance.
The timing of his proposal, coinciding with the dream plague's resurgence, cannot be ignored.
Her father's expression darkened.
Our intelligence suggests he has taken an unusual interest in ancient texts regarding the original plague. 3 of our archivists who specialized in such knowledge have disappeared in recent months.
And there have been inconsistencies in Lord Aurelius's statements.
Added Trade Minister Alara carefully.
He claims to desire peace between our cities, yet his furnace corps continue to probe our western territories, while his diplomatic attention is focused here.
So you believe the betrothal is merely a distraction, a means to some other end?
We cannot be certain, but we cannot risk waiting to find out.
He turned to Elian.
Courier Norwood has proven himself both resourceful and trustworthy. He will lead your escort to the wellspring.
Elian stepped forward, his expression serious.
Your safety is my highest priority, Lady Thalia. I've traveled the route before and know which paths avoid the worst dangers.
You will be accompanied by Hydromancer Lyrian for healing, Glasswright Taver for magical defense, and Vanguard Kirshen for physical protection.
A water healer, a mage, and a Bellatori. A small but formidable escort. Yet Thalia couldn't help but note the absence of her father's most elite guards, who would surely remain with him.
When were you going to tell me about this plan?
When necessary, which is now.
Her father's expression softened slightly.
I know this is unexpected, Thalia, but the desert has grown more dangerous in recent months, and Cormac Aurelius more ambitious than his father ever was. This journey is as much for your protection as for Aquilon's.
And if I refuse? If I choose to stay and face whatever threat may come?
Then you would demonstrate courage, but not wisdom.
Her father's voice carried the weight of both ruler and parent.
Sometimes the most difficult battles are those we choose not to fight. Yet,
Understanding the decision was made, Thalia nodded reluctantly.
When do we depart?
First light tomorrow, as your father told Lord Aurelius.
Elian replied.
But we have much to prepare before then. The quartermaster awaits us at the provisioning center.
go now. I have instructed the others to meet you there.
He touched Thalia's shoulder briefly, a rare gesture of affection in the formal setting.
Trust Courier Norwood. He understands more about the desert's dangers than most.
With that cryptic statement, the meeting concluded. Thalia found herself walking alongside Elian through Aquilon's lower tiers, toward the provisioning center where their supplies would be gathered. The silver streak in his hair seemed to shimmer in her peripheral vision, drawing her attention despite her attempts to maintain professional distance.
Have you truly visited the wellspring before?
She asked as they descended a spiral staircase of crystal and silver.
Once, 3 years ago.
He answered, his voice carrying the slight roughness she remembered from their dance.
Though I didn't know its significance at the time. I was mapping alternative routes between the walking cities.
And what did you find there?
He hesitated, something troubled crossing his features.
Dreams, stronger, more vivid than anywhere else in the desert.
His hand unconsciously rose to touch the silver streak in his hair.
It was there that I experienced my first episode.
Episode?
A blackout. One moment I was examining ancient inscriptions on the wellspring walls. The next I was miles away with no memory of how I'd gotten there.
He glanced at her, then quickly away.
Your father knows. It's why I'm assigned to remote routes, away from diplomatic functions where such episodes might cause embarrassment.
The casual admission of weakness surprised her. Most men in his position would have hidden such a vulnerability.
Yet he trusts you with his daughter's safety.
Perhaps because I understand what it means to be haunted by dreams.
The quietness of his response silenced further questions. They continued downward in thoughtful silence until they reached the provisioning center, a cavernous space filled with supplies, equipment, and the distinctive smell of the oil used to protect items from desert sand. Quartermaster Boren, a stocky man with the weathered face of a former desert scout, greeted them with ill-concealed skepticism.
A 4-person expedition to the wellspring, with the Fathermark's daughter no less?
He shook his head.
Madness, if you ask me, but the Fathermark doesn't ask, he orders.
He consulted a list, frowning.
Sandstriders are prepared, 4 of our best. Water supplies, rations, standard emergency equipment.
He looked up at Elian.
But some of your specialized requests, mirage netting, umbral sight goggles, thermal dampeners, those aren't standard issue.
But necessary nonetheless.
Elian's voice carried quiet authority.
The eastern routes have grown more dangerous. We've had reports of shadow stalkers and heat serpents migrating inward from the far wastes.
I don't have authorization to release such equipment without...
Will my authorization suffice, Quartermaster?
Thalia interrupted, drawing herself up to her full height. Boren blinked in surprise, then bowed hastily.
Of course, Lady Thalia, but I still don't have the items in question. They need to be sourced from the markets, and some...
He hesitated.
And some might only be available through less official channels.
The black market, he means.
Elian clarified, his expression grim.
I can handle that. If you'll authorize funds, Lady Thalia, I'll acquire what we need.
I'll accompany you.
Both men turned to her with identical expressions of shock.
That's not necessary, Lady Thalia. The markets can be unpredictable.
All the more reason I should familiarize myself with them before a journey where unpredictability may determine our survival.
She held his gaze steadily.
Unless you believe the Fathermark's daughter too delicate for reality, Courier Norwood?
Something that might have been respect flickered in his dark eyes.
Not at all. But perhaps a less identifiable outfit would be prudent.
Half an hour later, Thalia emerged from her chambers dressed in clothing Lissa had procured from the servants' quarters. Simple desert garb of undyed cotton, a hooded cloak of pale brown, and practical boots. Her elaborate braids had been concealed beneath a wrapped head covering, and she wore tinted crystal lenses to disguise her distinctive violet blue eyes.
Better.
He approved, though his gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary.
Though there's little we can do about your bearing, you move like someone accustomed to being watched.
Is that a compliment or a criticism?
An observation.
The corner of his mouth quirked slightly.
Try slouching more.
She raised an eyebrow at him, but made a deliberate effort to relax her perfect posture as they moved through Aquilon's lower tiers toward the public market that had sprung up at the oasis's edge. The market was a riot of color, sound, and scent. A temporary city of tents and stalls where traders from all the walking cities exchanged goods. They moved past displays of terramount crystals, verdantil spices, and mechanical curiosities from Cognitea. Elian maintained a protective position slightly ahead of her, his tall frame clearing a path through the crowd. Unnoticed by either of them, a patch of shadow beneath a vendor's stall seemed to detach itself and flow after them, maintaining a careful distance.
This way,
Elian murmured, guiding her toward a less populated section where the tents grew shabbier and the merchants more vigilant.
the items we need aren't exactly prohibited, but they're regulated. Watch my lead, speak little, and keep your hood up.
He led her to a tent, distinguished only by a small symbol painted on its flap, a circle bisected by a wavy line, which Thalia recognized as the ancient glyph for hidden passage. Inside, the air was thick with incense that tickled her nose and made her eyes water slightly. A woman with the distinctive copper-red skin of an Igniti sat behind a table of miscellaneous objects, her ember-orange eyes widening slightly as they entered. Norwood, she acknowledged with a nod. Twice in one season, the desert must be getting friendlier.
Or less so,
he countered.
I need specialized equipment, Sarah. Umbral sight goggles, thermal dampeners, and mirage netting.
The Igniti woman whistled softly.
Planning a stroll through the Valley of Whispers, are we?
Her gaze shifted to Thalia, curiosity evident.
And with company, no less.
The destination is our business. The equipment is yours. Do you have it?
Goggles and dampeners, yes. Mirage netting.
She hesitated.
There's only one merchant here with quality netting. Drav, 3 tents down, but he won't deal with humans directly, only enhanced species.
That complicates things.
Not necessarily.
Thalia interjected.
My great-grandmother was cognate on my mother's side.
It wasn't entirely false. Her unusual eyes came from somewhere, though her father had never fully explained her mother's lineage. Sarah studied her with renewed interest.
Mixed blood, eh? Might work, might not. Drav's particular about bloodlines.
It's not worth the risk. I'll find another solution.
We need that netting, do we not?
Thalia countered.
Let me try.
Before Elian could protest further, she exited the tent and located the one Sarah had indicated. Inside, the atmosphere was considerably more austere. No incense, no decorations, only row upon row of carefully organized equipment. The proprietor, a massive man with the distinctive crystalline skin patches of a Terran, looked up as she entered. His eyes, faceted like gemstones, narrowed with immediate suspicion.
No humans,
he stated flatly, his voice rumbling like stones grinding together.
Out.
Thalia straightened, abandoning her affected slouch, and lowered her hood just enough to reveal her eyes.
I require mirage netting. High quality sufficient to cover 5 sandstriders and riders.
The Terran's crystal-patched skin glinted as he leaned forward, studying her eyes.
Cognate blood,
he acknowledged.
But diluted, you're mixed.
Does that affect the quality of your merchandise or my coin?
A rumbling sound emerged from his chest. Laughter, she realized with surprise.
Sharp tongue, like pure blood cognate.
He reached below his counter.
I have netting. Best quality. 8,000 crystals.
The price was exorbitant, at least triple the standard rate. Thalia kept her expression neutral.
2,000.
7.
3, and I won't mention to my father, the Fathomark, how eagerly you price gouge his citizens.
The Terran froze, his crystalline patches glinting with sudden wariness.
You're not.
There you are, cousin.
Elian's voice boomed from the tent entrance as he strode in, smiling broadly.
Making purchases without me again? Your aunt specifically said I should handle the money after that incident with the Volukri feather merchant.
Thalia blinked in confusion, but Elian's pointed look prompted her to play along.
I was just negotiating.
Was she threatening to tell her imaginary important father again?
He asked Drav, his tone conspiratorial.
My apologies. My cousin has delusions of grandeur. We've consulted healers, but...
He shrugged expressively.
The cognity blood makes her clever, but unfortunately prone to fantasy.
Drav's suspicious expression morphed into understanding.
That explains much.
He turned back to Thalia with newfound pity.
5,000, final offer.
4, and we'll throw in a genuine Aquilon water purifier straight from the upper tiers.
The negotiation concluded quickly after that, with Elian handling the payment and collection of the netting. As they exited the tent, Thalia maintained a confused expression until they were well away from the black market section.
Cousin? Delusions of grandeur?
She turned on him, indignation rising.
You made me sound like a mentally unsound child.
I prevented you from being identified as the Fathomark's daughter in the middle of the black market.
He corrected, though his eyes held a hint of amusement.
Do you have any idea what a kidnapping opportunity that would present?
I was handling it.
You were announcing your lineage to a merchant known to have connections with desert raiders.
I got him to lower the price.
By announcing your value as a political hostage.
They glared at each other for a moment, before Thalia recognized the absurdity of the situation. A reluctant smile tugged at her lips.
It wasn't my most strategic negotiation,
she admitted.
Nor my most diplomatic rescue.
He conceded, his own expression softening.
Though I maintain delusions of grandeur, was an inspired touch.
A laugh escaped her, a genuine, unrestrained sound, so unlike her usual carefully modulated responses that it surprised them both. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them.
You should laugh more often,
he said quietly.
It suits you better than that diplomatic mask you wear.
The unexpected intimacy of the observation made her acutely aware of how close they stood. Close enough that she could see flecks of midnight blue in his otherwise dark eyes. Close enough to catch the scent of sun-warmed desert herbs that clung to his clothing.
We should return to Aquilon,
she said, taking a small step back.
There's much to prepare before tomorrow's departure.
He nodded, though something in his expression suggested reluctance.
Of course, Lady Thalia.
After making me your delusional cousin, I think you've earned the right to use just Thalia when we're not in formal company.
The smile that spread across his face transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made her heart perform an unexpected fluttering motion in her chest.
As you wish, Thalia.
The way he said her name, as though tasting something rare and precious, sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the desert sun. As they made their way back toward Aquilon, laden with their peculiar purchases, Thalia found herself wondering what other discoveries their journey might bring. Neither noticed the patch of shadow that detached itself from a vendor's stall and flowed rapidly away, its mission of observation complete for now. In a private chamber aboard Pirotus, Lord Cormac Aurelius watched as the shadow materialized into a vaguely humanoid form, its edges still wavering like heat distortion.
Report,
he commanded. The umbral bowed, its voice like dry leaves rustling over sand. They prepare for departure at first light. The courier leads. They purchase defensive equipment against shadow and heat threats.
Interesting.
Cormac's perfect features arranged themselves in a contemplative expression.
They anticipate dangers I haven't yet deployed.
He rose, moving to a map spread across a table of polished obsidian. With one finger, he traced the likely route to the wellspring, his nail leaving a faint trail of gold dust in its wake.
It seems the Fathomark's daughter has more value than even I suspected.
He turned back to the umbral, his eyes swirling with golden light.
Prepare the Bellatory strike team. I want them following at a discreet distance.
He smiled coldly.
Let Courier Norwood and his little expedition reach the wellspring. They may save us considerable effort in unlocking its secrets.
The umbral bowed and melted back into the shadows, leaving Cormac alone with his plans and the gold dust slowly spreading across the map like a creeping stain. Chapter 4, Part 1, Desert Lessons. Dawn had barely begun to paint the horizon in shades of amber when Thalia arrived at Aquilon's lowest tier. The massive beast that carried their city remained motionless, conserving its strength for the journey ahead, while the smaller platform at its base hummed with activity. 4 sand striders, long-limbed creatures with wide, flat feet adapted for desert travel, stood patiently as supplies were secured to their backs. Thalia approached cautiously, having only seen sand striders from a distance before. Up close, they were even more peculiar, their bodies covered in fine scales that shimmered with iridescence in the early morning light, elongated necks stretching nearly twice the height of a tall man, and large, liquid eyes that regarded her with unmistakable intelligence. Elian was already there, checking the harnesses with practiced efficiency. He wore practical desert garb, loose-fitting layers in muted browns and grays, a head wrap that could be pulled up to protect against sandstorms, and a curved blade at his hip that looked well used. The silver streak in his hair caught the first rays of sunlight, gleaming like polished metal against the darker strands. He looked up as she approached, surprise briefly crossing his features before he schooled his expression.
Lady Thalia?
He greeted, then corrected himself with a hint of a smile.
Thalia, you're early.
I thought it prudent to familiarize myself with our mounts before departure.
She maintained a composed demeanor despite the flutter of nervousness in her stomach. The strider's powerful legs and alien appearance were more intimidating than she'd anticipated.
A wise decision.
He gestured toward the nearest strider, a creature with scales in varying shades of amber.
This is Sirocco. He'll be your mount for the journey.
Thalia approached cautiously, hand outstretched as she might with a more familiar animal. Sirocco regarded her with one large golden eye, then suddenly extended his long neck, bringing his face alarmingly close to hers. She froze, uncertain what etiquette applied to desert striders.
He's tasting your scent,
Elian explained, moving to stand beside her.
Striders have smell glands in their facial ridges. Stand still and let him recognize you.
Thalia remained motionless as the creature's face hovered inches from her own, its breath warm against her skin. After a long moment, Sirocco made a soft trilling sound and nudged her shoulder gently.
He approves.
There was unmistakable amusement in Elian's voice.
Though I suspect it's the water lily soap, striders are drawn to floral scents.
And how does one normally gain a strider's approval without luxury soaps?
She asked dryly, relaxing slightly as Sirocco backed away.
Bribery, usually.
He produced a small fruit from his pocket, wrinkled and unappetizing, and offered it to Sirocco, who delicately plucked it from his palm with a forked tongue.
Desert plums. Their favorite treat.
He offered another to Thalia, who held it out to Sirocco with more confidence. The strider accepted it with the same delicate precision, making that trilling sound again.
I'm honored by your approval, Sirocco,
she said formally, earning another amused glance from Elian.
He's a desert strider, not a court dignitary.
Every creature deserves basic courtesy.
She straightened her posture.
Besides, he seems more receptive to polite address than some human nobles I've encountered.
A laugh escaped Elian, warm and genuine, transforming his usually guarded expression into something that made Thalia momentarily forget the early hour and the journey ahead.
Fair point. Though you might save your formal address for Zephyr.
He gestured to another strider, this one with scales in smoky gray tones, who stood slightly apart from the others.
He's nearing 20 years old and thinks himself above the common herd.
As if understanding, Zephyr turned his long neck to regard them with what could only be described as haughty disdain.
My mount for nearly a decade.
He explained with obvious affection.
We've crossed the endless desert more times than I can count.
He approached Zephyr, who immediately lowered his head to press against Elian's chest in a gesture of unmistakable recognition. Elian stroked the strider's neck with the casual intimacy of an old friendship.
Yes, old friend, another journey.
He murmured.
But important company this time.
Thalia watched their interaction with unexpected wistfulness. Her life in Aquilon's upper tiers had offered little opportunity for such unguarded connections, animal or human. Movement at the base platform's entrance drew her attention as the rest of their party arrived. Hydromancer Elian led the group, a middle-aged woman with water-blue tattoos following the veins along her arms, marking her as a healer of considerable skill. Behind her came Glasswright Tavor, his crystalline eye replacements catching the light unnervingly as he surveyed their equipment. Bringing up the rear was Vanguard Kirshin, whose Bellatory heritage was evident in his imposing musculature and the battle trance marks etched into his skin.
Lady Thalia.
Lyrian greeted with a respectful nod.
The preparations are complete. We can depart as soon as you're ready.
Thank you, Hydromancer. I'm in Courier Norwood's capable hands for this journey.
She gestured to Elian, who had moved to distribute final supplies among the Strider's packs. The others turned to him, with varying degrees of assessment in their gazes.
You're the courier who made the eastern crossing during the Blood Moon sandstorms,
Kirshin observed, his voice a low rumble.
I thought you'd be older.
And I thought Bellatory traveled in squads, not solo assignments.
Elian countered, not looking up from his task. A tense silence followed before Kirshin unexpectedly laughed, a booming sound that startled the nearest Strider.
Fair enough, Desert Walker. I'll trust your paths if you trust my blade.
If we've finished establishing dominance and by bishing dominance,
Tavor interjected, his artificial eyes whirring slightly as they focused.
Perhaps we could depart before the sun rises fully, unless someone would prefer traveling in midday heat.
Elian nodded, all business now as he gestured to their respective mounts.
Mounting from the left side only, Striders are sensitive about their balance. Keep your weight centered and let them choose their footing. They know the desert better than we do.
He demonstrated with fluid grace, swinging on to Zephyr's back in a single practiced motion. The others followed his example with varying degrees of success, Lyrian and Kirshin managing adequately, while Tavor required assistance due to his modified vision. Thalia approached Sirocco with determined confidence that faltered slightly as she realized how high off the ground the riding harness sat. The Strider regarded her expectantly, making no move to lower himself.
I assume there are no mounting steps in the desert,
she murmured, measuring the distance with her eyes.
None that I've encountered,
he replied, watching her with an expression that hovered between amusement and assessment.
There's a foot brace on the harness strap.
Thalia located it and placed her foot in the leather loop, then pulled herself upward with what she hoped appeared as practiced ease. For a heart-stopping moment, she teetered precariously before finding her seat. Sirocco shifted beneath her, adjusting to her weight, and she gripped the harness tightly to steady herself.
Breathe,
Elian suggested quietly, maneuvering Zephyr alongside her.
Striders sense fear. The calmer you appear, the smoother your ride will be.
Thalia forced her white-knuckled grip to relax and drew a deep breath.
I'm perfectly composed,
she assured him, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor.
Of course,
he agreed solemnly, though his eyes danced with suppressed humor.
Your diplomatic training serves you well.
Thalia narrowed her eyes at him, sensing the gentle teasing beneath his deference.
Your observational skills are impressive, Courier Norwood,
she replied loftily.
Though perhaps they be better directed toward our route than my composure.
His lips twitched with barely contained laughter.
As you wish, Lady Thalia.
With a subtle command to Zephyr, he moved to the front of their small procession. Thalia watched the easy unity of rider and mount with a mixture of admiration and determination. By journey's end, she resolved, she would master this strange mode of transportation, As they descended from Aquilon's base platform onto the desert floor, Thalia felt a profound shift in her perception. Without the constant subtle vibration of the walking city beneath her feet, the world seemed eerily still. The vastness of the endless desert stretched before them in undulating waves of sand, broken only by scattered rock formations that rose like islands in a golden sea. Elian set a moderate pace, leading them away from the oasis along a route that left no visible trail. The striders moved with surprising grace for such ungainly-looking creatures, their wide feet distributing their weight so effectively they barely disturbed the sand surface. For the first hour, they traveled in relative silence, each adjusting to the rhythm of their mounts and the changing terrain. As the sun climbed higher, Elian guided them toward a formation of wind-carved stone that offered narrow strips of shade.
"We'll rest briefly,"
he announced, dismounting with practiced ease.
"The striders need to cool their gills."
"Their what?"
Thalia asked, startled. In answer, Elian approached Zephyr and pressed gently along the creature's jawline. A series of previously invisible slits opened along the strider's neck, revealing delicate membranous structures that pulsed with a subtle blue glow.
"Desert adaptation,"
he explained.
"They extract moisture from the air. In extreme conditions, they can go weeks without drinking actual water."
Fascinated, Thalia dismounted, with considerably less grace than Elian had shown, and approached Sirocco to examine this feature. The strider obligingly lowered his head, allowing her to observe the gill's gentle pulsation.
"Remarkable,"
she murmured.
"Our engineers would be fascinated by the mechanism."
"The desert is full of unexpected solutions to survival,"
he replied, something in his tone suggesting the observation extended beyond biology. Their rest was brief but welcome. As they prepared to continue, Thalia noticed Elian scanning the horizon with unusual intensity.
"Is something wrong?"
she asked, following his gaze but seeing nothing but endless sand.
"Not wrong, different."
He pointed to a distant heat shimmer that, to Thalia's untrained eye, looked identical to a dozen others distorting the landscape.
"The air currents have shifted since we left. There's a calima forming to the east."
"A what?"
The Bellatori warrior squinted in the indicated direction.
"Dust front,"
she translated, her water-marked arms gleaming with a faint blue luminescence as she sensed the atmospheric changes.
"Not yet a sandstorm, but carrying fine particles that can blind and choke if you're caught unprepared."
"It's moving parallel to our route for now,"
he observed.
"But we should adjust our heading slightly to maintain safe distance."
He remounted Zephyr and led them on a course that veered more northerly than their previous heading. Thalia noticed that the striders seemed to approve of this change, their pace becoming more eager as if relieved by the decision. The desert landscape slowly transformed as they traveled, transitioning from rolling dunes to a more varied terrain of hard-packed sand interspersed with rocky outcroppings. Vegetation appeared, sparse and alien, but persistent, clinging to whatever minimal moisture the harsh environment provided. By midday, the heat had become oppressive despite their protective clothing. Thalia felt perspiration trickling uncomfortably down her spine, and her throat burned with each breath of the increasingly dry air. She reached for her water flask, uncapping it with fingers that felt swollen and clumsy.
"Small sips,"
Elian cautioned, noticing her movement.
"Drink too quickly and your body won't absorb it properly."
"I'm aware of basic hydration principles,"
she replied with more edge than intended, the heat fraying her usual composure. She raised the flask to her lips, taking a deliberately moderate drink. As she moved to replace it in her saddlebag, a sudden gust of wind caught her by surprise. She fumbled the container, watching in horror as it tumbled from her grasp and landed in the sand, precious water spilling into the thirsty ground.
"No,"
she gasped, dismounting hastily to retrieve it. In her haste, she lost her balance and landed awkwardly beside the nearly empty flask, sand immediately infiltrating her clothing. Elian was beside her in an instant, moving with that fluid grace that seemed almost unnatural. He retrieved the flask before more could spill, securing the cap with practiced efficiency.
"Are you injured?"
he asked, his tone practical rather than condescending.
Only my dignity.
She admitted, accepting his outstretched hand and allowing him to help her to her feet.
And now I've wasted water like a careless child.
"The desert humbles everyone eventually,"
he said simply, brushing sand from her sleeve.
"I lost an entire day's water supply on my first solo crossing. Nearly died of thirst before finding an unmarked sinkhole spring."
The matter-of-fact admission of vulnerability surprised her. She had expected mockery or, worse, patronizing reassurance.
How did you survive?
"By letting go of pride and listening to the desert."
He reached for his own water flask and offered it to her.
"We share resources now. That's the first law of desert survival."
She accepted the flask, their fingers brushing momentarily in the exchange. A strange, tingling sensation traveled up her arm at the contact, like static electricity but warmer, more alive.
Thank you,
she said softly, taking a careful sip before returning it to him.
I'll be more cautious going forward.
"Caution is good, fear is not."
He returned the flask to his saddlebag with practiced efficiency.
"The desert doesn't forgive fear, it feeds on it."
As they remounted and continued their journey, Thalia mulled over his words. Much of her life had been structured around caution. Careful words, careful decisions, careful maintenance of her father's diplomatic legacy. But fear, had that also been a constant companion, disguised as protocol and propriety? The afternoon brought new challenges as they entered a region Elian identified as the Whispering Flats, a vast expanse where the sand had been compressed into an almost glass-like surface by ancient geological pressures. The Strider's feet made soft clicking sounds as they traversed it, the noise echoing strangely in the open space.
Acoustically fascinating,
the Glasswright observed, his mechanical eyes whirring as they adjusted to the reflective surface.
The harmonics suggest hollow spaces beneath.
"More than suggest,"
Elian confirmed.
"The entire region is honeycombed with caves. It's why we need to follow this exact path."
He pointed to barely visible markers, small piles of dark stones placed at irregular intervals.
"Step wrong and the surface might collapse."
Thalia studied the seemingly solid ground with new wariness.
These markers, who maintains them?
Desert nomads mostly, some couriers like myself. It's an unspoken agreement. You use the path, you maintain the markers.
How do you know they haven't been deliberately misplaced?
The Bellatori asked, his warrior's instincts clearly raising suspicions.
Seems an easy trap for raiders.
Because the same people who would use such a tactic would themselves need safe passage another day.
Elian explained patiently.
Even enemies respect certain desert rules. Survival trumps conflict out here.
They proceeded with increased caution, following Elian's lead with exacting precision. About halfway across the flats, a distinctive humming sound began to rise from beneath them, a low, oscillating tone that seemed to vibrate through the Striders' bodies.
What is that?
She asked, her water tattoos glowing brighter in response to some unseen stimulus.
The cave's breathing,
he answered, seemingly unperturbed.
Air currents flow through the underground network and create resonance patterns. It's why they call this place the Whispering Flats.
As if on cue, the humming changed pitch, transforming into something unnervingly similar to distant voices speaking in fragmented phrases. Thalia strained to make out words, finding herself oddly compelled by the sound.
Don't listen too closely,
he warned, noticing her intent expression.
Desert superstition says the whispers are the voices of those who wandered off the path, still trying to guide travelers or lure them astray.
You don't strike me as someone who puts stock in superstition,
she observed, forcing herself to focus on him rather than the eerily compelling sounds. Something shadowed his expression momentarily.
Let's just say I've learned to respect the desert's mysteries, whether they have explanations or not.
They had nearly reached the end of the Whispering Flats when Sirocco suddenly halted, his long neck extending forward as his nostrils flared. The other Striders immediately mimicked his posture, their bodies going rigid with alertness.
Nobody move,
Elian commanded softly, his hand moving to the curved blade at his hip. Thalia froze, her heart rate accelerating as she followed Elian's tense gaze. At first she saw nothing unusual, just more of the glassy surface stretching toward a rocky outcropping about 50 yards ahead. Then she noticed a subtle distortion in the air near the rocks, like the heat shimmer they'd observed earlier, but more concentrated, more purposeful in its movement.
Heat serpent,
the Bellatori whispered, his hand already on his weapon.
No, worse.
Elian's voice was barely audible.
Mirage Stalker, it's hunting us.
As if summoned by the name, the distortion intensified, coalescing into a vaguely quadrupedal shape that seemed constructed of concentrated desert heat. Its edges remained blurred and shifting, making it difficult to determine its exact dimensions. But the predatory intent in its movement was unmistakable.
What is it?
She whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady.
Desert predator that feeds on moisture and heat,
he replied, slowly reaching into his saddlebag while maintaining eye contact with the creature.
They're drawn to body heat and water sources?
Fascinating,
the Glasswright murmured, his artificial eyes clicking rapidly as they shifted through different perception modes.
It exists partially in a heat dimension adjacent to our own. That's why its form appears unstable.
Less analysis, more action,
growled the Bellatori, unsheathing his blade.
Can it be killed?
Not easily, and not with conventional weapons,
Elian cautioned, producing a small glass sphere filled with swirling blue liquid from his bag.
But it can be deterred.
The creature began moving toward them with increasing speed, its form elongating like stretching taffy as it accelerated. The striders made distressed trilling sounds but held their positions, seemingly trained for such encounters.
When I give the signal, everyone throw your thermal dampeners toward it. Aim for the center mass, then immediately cover your eyes.
He distributed the small blue spheres with quick precision. Thalia accepted hers, feeling the odd coldness of the glass despite the desert heat. The Mirage Stalker was now close enough that Thalia could see what passed for its face. A rippling void where features seemed to form and dissolve in constant flux. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced it down, focusing instead on Elian's calm, measured movements beside her.
Now,
he commanded. In unison, they hurled the glass spheres toward the approaching creature. The projectiles arced through the air and shattered against the ground just before the Mirage Stalker. Upon impact, they released bursts of intense blue light, accompanied by waves of cold so severe Thalia felt it even at their distance. The creature emitted a sound like steam escaping from a pressurized vessel, a high, keening wail that vibrated the glassy surface beneath them. It recoiled, its form distorting wildly as it retreated toward the rocky outcropping.
Move, quickly but carefully, stay on the marked path.
They urged their striders forward, maintaining formation as they hurried past the location where the creature had been. Thalia risked a glance back and saw the Mirage Stalker regrouping, its form beginning to stabilize once more.
It's recovering,
she called out.
Expected. The dampeners only buy time.
He produced another small device from his bag, this one a metallic cylinder with intricate engravings.
Taver, I need a glass barrier. Can you manage while mounted?
The Glasswright nodded, his crystalline eyes gleaming as he extended his hands toward the ground behind them. The glassy surface began to liquefy and then rise, forming a translucent wall that solidified with remarkable speed.
Lyrian, water veil behind the glass, if you please.
The hydromancer's tattoos glowed brightly as she drew moisture from specialized containers at her belt, forming it into a shimmering curtain that adhered to the glass barrier Taver had created. Elian waited until both defenses were in place before activating the cylinder in his hand. It emitted a high-pitched whine and then projected a pattern of light that interacted with the water veil, creating a maze-like illusion of multiple paths and heat signatures.
That should confuse it long enough for us to reach safer ground.
He secured the still active device to a rocky outcropping they passed.
Keep moving. Don't look back again. Your body heat might draw its attention through the barrier.
They maintained a swift pace until they reached the end of the Whispering Flats, where the terrain transitioned back to more conventional desert, a relief after the exposed vulnerability of the glassy plain. Only when they were well into the shelter of a rock-strewn valley did Elian signal for them to slow their pace.
Impressive teamwork,
the Bellatori acknowledged, nodding to each of them in turn.
Though I'd still prefer enemies I can stab.
You would.
The Hydromancer replied with surprising warmth.
Always looking to solve problems with that overgrown knife.
The easy banter suggested a familiarity Thalia hadn't noticed before. She wondered if they had worked together previously.
How did you know what to do?
She asked Elian.
That seemed far too coordinated for an unexpected encounter.
I didn't live this long crossing the desert by leaving survival to chance,
he replied.
Before we left, I briefed everyone on possible threats and corresponding defensive strategies. While you were saying your farewells to your father,
she felt a flash of irritation at having been excluded, however unintentionally.
In the future, I'd appreciate being included in all mission preparations, regardless of my other obligations.
To her surprise, Elian inclined his head respectfully.
You're right, I apologize. It won't happen again.
The simple acknowledgement disarmed her prepared arguments. She had expected resistance, perhaps condescension, not immediate acceptance of her position.
Thank you,
she said, somewhat awkwardly.
And thank you for leading us safely through that encounter.
We're alive because everyone played their part,
he corrected gently.
Including you. You spotted the creature's recovery first. In the desert, survival is collective.
Something warm unfurled in Thalia's chest at his words, an unfamiliar sense of belonging based not on her title or bloodline, but on genuine contribution. It was a novel feeling, and one she found she quite liked. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Elian led them to a sheltered canyon that offered natural protection from both winds and unwanted attention. The Striders immediately began pawing at certain plants growing between rocks, ingesting them with evident satisfaction.
We'll camp here tonight,
he announced, dismounting and beginning to unpack essential supplies.
The canyon walls will retain heat after sunset, and there's a small spring at the far end for refilling water containers.
Everyone dismounted and fell into efficient roles. Lyrian checking the spring's quality, Tavor setting up perimeter protections, Kirshen establishing defensive positions. Thalia stood awkwardly for a moment, unsure of her place in this well-practiced routine.
Would you like to help prepare the Striders for the night?
He asked, noticing her uncertainty.
They need their harnesses removed and their scales checked for irritation.
I'd be glad to,
she replied, grateful for the purposeful task.
Though you may need to guide me through the process?
He nodded, leading her to where Sirocco waited patiently.
Start with the understrap here.
He demonstrated on Zephyr, his movements gentle but efficient.
Then work your way forward to the neck harness.
Thalia followed his example, finding unexpected satisfaction in the methodical task. Sirocco seemed to approve of her efforts, making that trilling sound whenever she managed a particularly skillful unbuckling.
He's very responsive,
she observed, stroking the Strider's neck as she had seen Elian do with Zephyr.
Striders form deep bonds with respectful handlers.
He paused in his work to observe her technique.
You have a natural touch. Most new riders treat them too much like beasts of burden or too much like pets. You're finding the balance.
The unexpected praise warmed her more than it should have. She focused on removing the last strap to hide the pleased flush rising to her cheeks.
What exactly is the proper category for them? They seem far more intelligent than simple animals.
Desert nomads believe they're descendants of the original inhabitants of the endless desert, beings who chose to surrender speech and civilization for perfect adaptation to this environment.
He ran a hand along Zephyr's flank with obvious affection.
Whether that's true or just legend, they certainly have awareness beyond most creatures.
With the Striders settled, the group assembled around a small heat source Tavor had created, a crystalline formation that glowed with warm light, but produced no flame.
Flameless heat,
He explained when Thalia examined it curiously.
necessary in the desert. Open flame attracts predators and wastes precious oxygen.
They shared a simple meal of concentrated trail rations, supplemented by dried fruits that Elian distributed from a carefully wrapped package.
Desert plums preserved in honey.
She explained, offering Thalia a wrinkled, amber-colored piece.
They help maintain energy levels and protect against the dry air.
The fruit was intensely sweet, with an underlying tartness that seemed to spread warmth through Thalia's body as she consumed it. She accepted a second piece gratefully. As night descended fully, the temperature dropped with surprising speed. Thalia found herself inching closer to the crystal heat source, wrapping her cloak more tightly around her shoulders.
Desert nights are deceptive,
He commented, noticing her discomfort.
The temperature can drop 30 degrees from day to night. Your body needs time to adjust to the fluctuations.
He reached into a pack and withdrew additional blankets woven from some fiber Thalia didn't recognize, distributing them among the group.
Sand silk,
He explained as he handed one to her.
harvested from the cocoons of desert moths, retains heat better than any other natural fiber.
Thalia wrapped the unexpectedly soft material around herself, immediate warmth enveloping her.
It's remarkable.
She murmured, running her fingers over the intricate weave.
I've never seen it like in Aquilon's markets.
The nomads rarely trade it outside their tribes. This set was a gift for guiding a lost clan back to their seasonal grounds during a particularly vicious sandstorm season.
You've lived quite the life beyond the walking cities, haven't you, courier?
The glasswright observed, his artificial eyes gleaming in the crystal light.
Just a different life,
Elian replied, his tone suggesting the topic was not one he wished to elaborate on. A comfortable silence fell over the group as they finished their meal. The vastness of the desert night surrounded them, a darkness deeper than anything Thalia had experienced within Aquilon's perpetually illuminated tiers. Yet it wasn't threatening. Rather, it felt ancient and somehow watching, like being in the presence of a sleeping giant. One by one, the others retired to their bedrolls, leaving Thalia and Elian as the last two awake. The crystal heat source cast their shadows in elongated patterns against the canyon wall, dancing slightly with each subtle movement. Above them, unfamiliar constellations blazed with an intensity Thalia had never witnessed from within Aquilon's illuminated tiers.
They're beautiful,
She murmured, gazing upward.
We have star maps in the archives, of course, but they hardly capture this.
Elian followed her gaze, his expression softening in the dim light.
The desert night sky is one of the few luxuries freely available out here.
He pointed to a particularly bright cluster.
The nomads call that formation the Water-Bearer's Crown. According to their beliefs, it marks the resting place of the first water finder, whose spirit still guides travelers to hidden springs.
Do you believe such stories?
Elian was quiet for a moment, considering.
I believe the desert reveals different truths to different people,
He finally answered.
Sometimes in dreams, sometimes in stars. I've learned not to dismiss what I don't understand.
His words hung between them, carrying implications beyond simple desert folklore. Thalia found herself studying his profile, noticing how the silver streak in his hair captured the starlight like polished metal.
The silver in your hair, you mentioned it appeared after your first blackout episode at the wellspring. Is there a connection?
He touched the streak unconsciously, his expression guarded.
Almost certainly, though I don't understand how or why. The nomads who found me afterward called it a dream mark, a sign of someone touched by forces beyond the waking world.
He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes.
More likely it's just stress or some biological reaction to whatever happened during the blackout.
Do you remember anything from these episodes?
Fragments, impressions.
He stared into the crystal's glow.
Crystal corridors stretching endlessly. Voices speaking in languages I shouldn't understand but somehow do. And always, a sense of something vast and ancient stirring, reaching out.
He shook his head abruptly.
But that's enough ghost stories for one night. We should rest. Tomorrow's terrain will be more challenging.
Despite his attempted dismissal, Thalia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. His description matched too closely her own recurring dreams, and those reported by the dream plague victims in Aquilon.
Elian,
she said quietly, using his given name without titles or pretense for the first time.
These dream fragments, have they been increasing recently, becoming more vivid?
He looked at her sharply, sudden alertness in his posture.
How did you know?
Because I've been experiencing something similar, as have the dream plague victims in Aquilon.
An extended silence fell between them, heavy with implications neither seemed ready to voice.
Your father knows about my episodes,
he said finally.
It's why he assigned me to this mission, isn't it? Not just as a guide, but as... what? A test subject? A canary in the crystal mines?
There was no accusation in his tone, merely a quiet resignation that somehow hurt Thalia more than anger would have.
I don't know,
she answered honestly.
My father shares his knowledge sparingly, even with me. Perhaps especially with me.
And yet he entrusted you to my care, knowing my condition.
He gave a humorless laugh.
Either he believes I can control these episodes, or he considers whatever connection I have to them potentially valuable at the wellspring.
Or he simply trusts your character regardless of your condition,
she suggested.
As do I, having seen how you handle yourself today.
Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, at her straightforward vote of confidence.
Then we have an interesting journey ahead,
he said, his voice warming slightly.
The Fathomark's daughter and a courier with occasional blackouts, chasing dreams across the endless desert.
When you phrase it that way, it sounds almost romantic,
she replied before she could stop herself. In the crystal light, she saw his eyes widen slightly before he regained his composure.
The desert has that effect,
he replied carefully.
It strips away pretenses until even the absurd begins to seem reasonable.
An awkward silence followed, both aware of a boundary inadvertently approached. Thalia busied herself readjusting her sand silk blanket.
I should try to sleep,
she said finally.
As you said, tomorrow brings new challenges.
Of course.
He rose smoothly to his feet.
I'll take first watch. Sleep well, Thalia.
She watched as he moved toward the canyon entrance, his silhouette cutting a solitary figure against the star-filled sky. Something tugged at her heart, an unexpected empathy for the isolation that seemed as much a part of him as the silver in his hair.
We're both outsiders in our own ways,
she thought as she settled onto her bedroll. He in the world of humans, and I in the diplomatic cage of Aquilon. Sleep came more easily than she had expected, the day's exertions and the gentle hum of the crystal heat source lulling her into slumber. But her dreams, when they came, were vivid and disturbing. Crystal corridors that seemed to pulse with life. 9 distinct voices calling in languages she shouldn't understand, and everywhere, the sense of something vast awakening beneath the desert sands. In her dream, she was running through those corridors, pursued by shadows that whispered her name. Ahead, a figure stood silhouetted against blinding light, a tall form with a streak of silver in dark hair. She reached for him, feeling the dream space around them compress and vibrate with ancient energies. The Plague Maker's blood, voices whispered, the Mist Child's heart. The prison weakens. She jerked awake, heart racing, to find dawn painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson. Across the camp, Elian was already awake, watching her with an expression that suggested he somehow knew what had disturbed her sleep.
Did you dream?
She asked simply.
Yes,
he replied, offering no details. Yet the understanding in his eyes told her enough. By unspoken agreement, they didn't discuss the dreams as they prepared for departure. The others were stirring now, greeting the morning with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Kershin moved with the practiced efficiency of a warrior accustomed to early risings, while Tavor adjusted his artificial eyes with meticulous care before facing the dawn light. Lyrienne performed a quiet water ritual, her tattoos glowing faintly as she blessed their supply for the day's journey. Thalia approached Sirocco, who greeted her with that familiar trilling sound. His scales gleamed iridescent in the morning light as she checked them for irritation before applying the harness with newfound confidence.
"You're a quick study,"
he observed, appearing beside her with Zephyr's harness already secured.
"I've had an excellent teacher,"
she replied, managing a smile despite the lingering unease from her dreams.
"Today we crossed the drifting lands,"
he informed the group as they gathered their supplies.
"The terrain shifts constantly, so we follow scent markers rather than visual landmarks. The striders know the way, but it means riding in single file. Zephyr leads, then Lady Thalia, followed by Lyrienne, Tavor, and Kirshen at rear guard."
They mounted with considerably more grace than the previous day, Thalia pleased to find her body remembering the proper movements. As they set out from the canyon into the open desert, she felt a strange mixture of trepidation and exhilaration. The dreams, the wellspring, Lord Aurelius's mysterious interest in her, all of it suggested dangers beyond her diplomatic training. Yet as Sirocco fell into position behind Zephyr, matching the lead strider's pace with comfortable familiarity, Thalia found herself oddly at peace with the uncertainty. For perhaps the first time in her life, she was experiencing the world directly, not through the filtered lens of protocol and position.
"Is this how Elian feels all the time?"
she wondered, watching his straight-backed figure ahead of her, the silver streak in his hair catching the morning light. This strange freedom in the midst of danger. As if sensing her thoughts, he turned slightly, catching her eye with a brief smile that transformed his usually guarded features. Something warm kindled in her chest in response, a feeling as unfamiliar as the desert itself, yet somehow just as compelling. Overhead, the endless sky stretched from horizon to horizon, promising both challenge and discovery as they journeyed deeper into the endless desert's embrace. Behind them, their tracks vanished almost immediately, erased by the ever-shifting sands, as though the desert itself was conspiring to keep their passage secret, at least for now.